Hi, Tiff.
Hi, how you going?
Good yourself?
Yeah, good. Great.
We were supposed to have Mel with us today, but she seems to have gotten busy. I'm not sure whether she's going to join us a little bit later, but we're going to get started today. This is our first interview for Mel and my channel called Changeology Network. And last time we introduced about us just getting together with other people who have experienced some difficulties in their life and talking about how they've come out the other side. We've known each other, Tiff, for a few years, or known of each other, but known each other for a few years. And yeah, so today our topic we're going to discuss is domestic violence. You've experienced some yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to start by saying thank you. Thanks for letting me interview you, and thanks for coming in and talking, because I think the more that gets out there, the more women know that they are not alone. And hopefully this might give the strength to somebody out there to take steps and get out of a situation that they they don't want to be in.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I guess I just wanted to define what domestic violence is to begin with. Domestic violence, and this is a government document that I'm reading from Parliament House, and it's defining domestic violence as an act of violence that occurs between people who have or have had an intimate relationship in a domestic setting. And what does that include? This document is pretty comprehensive. It talks about emotional abuse, verbal abuse, social abuse, economic abuse, psychological abuse, spiritual abuse, physical abuse, and sexual abuse. So I guess there's a whole heap in there. And maybe once we sort of get talking, maybe you can discuss some of those that you've experienced, Tiff. But I'm just going to mention a couple of stats, which I found really interesting. And that is that 1 in 6 women have experienced physical or sexual violence by a current or former partner. And for men, it's 1 in 16. 75% of victims of domestic violence reported the perpetrator as male, while 25% reported the perpetrator as female. Overall, 1 in 5 women and 1 in 20 men have experienced sexual violence. And on average, 1 woman a week and 1 man each month is killed by a current or former partner. That is just gobsmacking. So the leading cause of homelessness in women, 1 in 3 clients of homeless shelters and the like are seeking assistance because they say that they've experienced domestic violence. And then in Indigenous communities, people are 32 times more likely to be hospitalised for family violence than non-Indigenous. And then people with disabilities are 1.8 times as likely to have experienced physical or sexual violence from a former partner in a previous year, to that study that was done. So let's not talk actually, no, I want to just mention a couple of risk factors first, because I guess these risk factors probably affect you as well, and some stuff that maybe you might be interested in talking about. So they say that the major risk factors for domestic violence is alcohol and drug use. That is the perpetrator using, that the increased level of alcohol and drug use then, might be increased likelihood of experiencing domestic violence. Child abuse, that people who receive domestic violence often have experienced child abuse or abuse while they were children. 2 more risk factors, pregnancy and separation. So there's quite a high percentage of women that experience domestic violence during their pregnancy. and also women who are separated as opposed to women who are married experience higher levels or higher rates of domestic violence. And so the last one is attitude to violence against women. That is, attitude and beliefs are really quite key to the way that we see things in our worldview. And then that also has flow-on effects as to whether somebody who's experiencing domestic violence might report that.
Mm.
Whether they might feel they might be believed. So, so with all of that in mind, with what it includes, our stats and our risk factors, did you want to, yeah, give us a little bit of a background. You can say as much as you like or as little as you like. It's completely up to you, Tiff.
Well, I guess I never really, I knew about domestic violence from a really young age, but only because I'd heard my mother speaking about it. You know, growing up in army bases, she was an army wife. She was home with the kids, and she was very involved with the, you know, the daycare centres. They used to, the wives and partners used to take, because you all lived on in a small community, while most of the men were working, the women would go to the community centre with their kids. And I just remember from a really young age, women coming in there to the community centre even, and this is in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, you know, with having problems with their husbands who had been abusive. Most of the problems I remember them discussing were around money, where he had control of all the bank accounts and she had no money to feed the kids, and she'd come to the community centre and the other women would help her out. They'd take meals over or what have you, help them out with medical things with the kids and things like that. And that was what I knew. And I remember my mum always saying to me, because Dad was away all the time, I just remember her saying to me all the time, if a man ever lays a hand on you, you leave straight away because it'll only get worse. That's all she used to say. Dad wasn't violent or abusive at all, you know, during those years. And so I just always had it in my head, oh, those poor women, you know, why would you stay in that environment? But I also knew I also had an understanding of entrapment, where they just become trapped in those situations. So that's all I really knew growing up, right up until, you know, I was in my own long-term relationship. And started there.
Yeah. So you didn't experience it as a child? I mean, as in your own family home. I mean,
not until I guess it. No, I've got to be careful what I say.
Yeah, I was contemplating about that question and asking you, because to be completely honest, I have that in my background as well, but I don't think I'd want to go into the detail.
Yeah. So it wasn't until, you know, I guess my father left after 20 odd years of military service. All Mum had to do was ring, you know, Department of Defence Housing, and she'd have a plumber over there to fix something, and removals were paid for, and all of those things were pretty much handed to you.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until Dad left the military, that he took us back to where my mum grew up, in a small country town, and they bought this block of land and had these dreams and aspirations. Well, how difficult many of us know as ex-service people, know how difficult it is once you're thrown into the real world and you've got to deal with the financial stress and you're on your own.
Well, you've got to adjust too. You come from a place where you're told what to do and you know you've got this massive structure, and then you go to no structure and it's really difficult for people to.
That's right. Yeah. So it wasn't until they both, you know, Dad's a Vietnam vet, so he had that underlying stresses there anyway, but he was able to cope with those because he was always out bush. When he wasn't out bush and wasn't working, we'd be out camping and going on a family adventures. So it was all happy families pretty much. So once we moved into this, and we were quite isolated in this new small country town, we didn't know anybody. He went from being a full-time medic to working in a hospital, nursing in a hospital, and so was Mum. She'd been nursing since she was 16. Yeah. So that was all hunky-dory until the, you know, financial stress started. and Dad started to really have those effects of the, I guess, the traumas and the PTSD, everything just caught up with him.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it just became really difficult. He never physically laid a hand on my mum or anything. Like he never did that. He never threatened her in any way, and there was no psychological abuse there or financial abuse or anything like that. It was just the, you know, when he would lose his mind and he would smash furniture up and just things like that. That was traumatizing enough. If you'd never seen your parents in such distress like that, and they're screaming and fighting at each other, that alone is really hard for children to cope with. So you're walking on eggshells anyway. But we did, you know, we used to get the good old kick in the butt and, you know, a slap and a pinch and a punch for not doing too much.
Yeah.
I make jokes about it, but, you know, it wasn't fun and games.
Yeah.
And Mum, she never really gave us a smack or anything, but Dad, he'd just black out and he'd just give us a hiding of our lives, and then he'd be remorseful afterwards. He was just under so much stress, and here I am making excuses for it, you know.
Yeah. I'm not making excuses when I say this either. I guess when we talk about this stuff, it's not just taking one side and being like, oh, that, you know, terrible person, you know, you need to look at both sides too, and absolutely not saying it was okay. But, you know, that, I mean, you know, because you're ex-defense and you see a lot of people with PTSD, but that is really common, and it's a really common, behavior for unmanaged PTSD, especially for men, is that real painful. Yep.
They just reach this boiling point and lose their mind because they just can't deal anymore, and they just explode, you know. And you know, whether it be the kitchen chairs that cop are hiding, or you know,
I think back then too, Tiff, you know, you're talking about the 80s and maybe the 90s, you know, I do remember, because my dad's a Vietnam veteran as well, and like very similar. You know, I remember, you know, going to VVCS, and there really wasn't, even though VVCS was there, it was great, but there really wasn't a lot of information out there on how to manage or what to do. It was, the help was pretty light on.
Minimal.
Yeah.
It wasn't really discussed either. No one talked about it, and there was nothing, especially where we grew up. There was no help and support for Mum and Dad at all. And when us kids started struggling with school and having social issues, like us kids would get into punch-ups at school because we would, I guess, taking our frustrations out. You know, we'd get bullied because we were new to town, and we would just punch the crap out of these kids, and we were always at the principal's office for defending ourselves. And we just grew up in that, you know, that's that violence solves your problems when you're not coping. I guess monkey see, monkey do. That's how I think about it as being a kid back then. Knowing no different now, but there was no help. And I guess my mum was the one who tried to get a social worker in to talk to me, because I was the oldest. I got two younger brothers, and I couldn't talk to her because I didn't know what was wrong. I didn't know what was wrong, what was going on with me. Why are your parents always angry with you? Like, why are you doing naughty things? Why aren't you being a good girl? And it's like, well, I don't know why. I don't know what's wrong with me. You know, what is wrong with me? I didn't understand. Mum did explain to her the situation, but there was no talk of Mum and Dad are screaming and fighting at each other every day.
No, and that wouldn't have been understood either back then.
No, and people just don't talk about that.
No.
Completely different nowadays.
Yeah. So I think I just wanted to throw in there as well, especially for people who are listening, is that in actual fact, like aside from domestic violence, that when a child does experience domestic violence, they are also at risk of not just experiencing domestic violence as adults, but they're also at risk of having PTSD. So it is one of the top 3 risk factors, if not the first off the top of my head. But I know it's one of the top 3 risk factors for PTSD is experiencing DV as a child.
I know that my brother it's had a huge effect on him. He's 12 months younger than me, and he's removed himself from the family for a number of years now. Maybe it's been about 9 years now, because he's still carrying the hurts of our childhood. He feels like he received the blunt end of everything.
Yeah.
And I'm a lot more forgiving, I guess, because of my own experience of joining the military, and I understand where Dad is coming from, but also knowing how far he's come from being in that place.
Yeah.
That he doesn't have those stresses anymore, that he's not a monster.
Yeah.
He just didn't know how to cope with the stresses, and neither did Mum. It was such a toxic environment to grow up in. I just remember wishing that both my brother and myself, wishing that they would just go their separate ways, so that we could just have some peace, because it was just so horrible to grow up in that with your parents screaming and yelling at each other all the time. And even though there was no violence, as in physical violence, it was psychological stress that we were going through. You know, we went from happy families to just thinking it felt like the end of the world. And to
you
carry
feel like
that,
you were living two lives, like you've got that life, and then out in public, you're like, oh yeah, everything's great, and we don't talk about it.
Yeah, especially when it comes to family reputation, sporting groups, work. I understand that level as well. And it was really, you know, I know it was, Mum and Dad are still together, and they've always stuck it out. They've always, through all the hard times, it's paid off. They're resilient, but at what price? You know, and like Mum says, there's no guides, there's no rule books to raising children. You just know what's right and what's wrong in your moral values. But when you're stuck in those situations where it comes to financial and struggles and emotional struggles, you know, and trauma, what do? You know?
So Tiff, thinking about that and thinking about all of that, do you think that I mean, I know regardless of the stats that say that it does have an effect, but with that in mind, do you feel like that shaped you for what happened as an adult in future with your future partners?
Well, when I was going through puberty, the puberty blues, I realised that I could be the powerful one. I could either be really weak and cry and be a victim and poor me, and you know, life is really tough and I'm just going to go drink myself stupid and do drugs. I learned different ways of coping, and my ways of coping were disappearing and hanging out with my friends, and then which led me to playing netball every weekend, and which led me to joining Army Cadets every weekend. And I just threw my whole self into it. And that was my way of coping with whatever was going on, which I didn't understand what was going on. So when I chucked those uniforms on, I could just go hard, and nothing could hurt me. You know, like physically, I could cop it on the chin. I would get in punch-ups after school, and you know, I had a group of girls gang up on me at the local playground, and I was just like, yeah, bring it on. Everyone was scared of them. They were like, you don't fight with them. That's you know, that family, they'll flog the crap out of you. And I was like, bring it on. I'll fight all of you. No fear. And I would just get punched in the face, and I was like, yeah, that doesn't hurt. My dad can hit harder than that. You know, those sorts of things.
Yep.
And then they were scared of me, and then they picked on me again, and I was like,
that's all you got?
This is my superpower. I'd go home and bawl my eyes out and wipe the blood and tears off, but I wouldn't tell anyone that they just kicked the crap out of me and whatever. But that's how I learnt to cope. And when I was in Army Cadets, it was like, no one can boss me around. These guys can't tell me what to do. I'm the boss. And I worked my way up and become a sergeant. And I really struggled with the education side, but I got the rank because of my determination, and because my nickname was Brass Balls, for God's sake. So, you know, the tough girl image, but really I'd go home and cry all night, you know, didn't sleep, I was stressed out. I wanted to commit suicide. I really hated myself. I had body images and stuff. But if you saw me out there, I was the class clown. I was kicking ass in cadets, and I was the best at shooting. I was the best at drill. My uniform was amazing. And it's just that mask. And it just made me feel like a superwoman, and that's what I wanted to do. And that's why I went off I guess that's why I joined the Army, to get out of there.
So what age did you join the Army?
I actually signed up when I tried to sign up when I was 16. My parents sent me to Perth to live with my auntie and uncle, so that I guess to teach me how to be a lady and have I don't know, I wasn't happy where I was. They
Yeah.
didn't want me having, my boyfriend was a lot older than me. They wanted me, so they didn't want me with this older guy, and
Yeah.
so they sent me to all the way over the other side of Australia.
Yeah.
And he wasn't that bad. He was actually a manager of a sportswear store, and he was a really nice guy.
Yeah.
They thought that was the way to go, so they sent me over there, and I tried to sign up at the recruiting school, at the recruiting centre in Perth, and they said, you're too young, come back next year. And anyway, my birthday came up in the June. I was 17, and I went straight back in there, and they were like, we told you to come back next year. I said, yeah, but I'm 17 now, I want to sign up. And anyway, they let me fill out all the paperwork and what have you, and I ended up in a youth hostel because I wasn't doing, I didn't do the housework. I wasn't cooking and cleaning for my uncle. They're very old school tradition, you know, dinner's on the table by 5, and it's girls' job to do this and do that, and that's pretty much how I was raised.
Yeah.
And I wasn't doing it. I was quite rebellious. I'm not going to say a bit. I was quite rebellious, but I was polite about it. I was very respectful, but I'm not your slave.
Yeah.
And just because I'm a girl, you can cook your own meals, mate.
Right,
And
that's fair enough.
but I wouldn't say that to his face. But that's how I felt.
Yeah.
Just watching my mum slave over making everything spotless all the time, and getting there was no gratitude or respect in that way, I felt.
Yeah. And you decided that wasn't what you wanted.
No, I didn't want that.
Yeah.
I wanted the man's life, the man's world, you know, having all these uncles and watching them rake in all the money and working these awesome jobs and going yachting and doing all this stuff. I wanted to have control of my life. I didn't want people telling me, go cook me some eggs. That's how I felt. So I signed up, and I went home for my 18th birthday, and I was a lot stronger physically and mentally because I'd had that break away from the whole family network and from everyone in my small country town. And I was had my eye on the prize. I want to be a soldier. I want to be a soldier. And I go running every day. I watched what I ate. My 18th birthday came up, and they messaged me. They rang me up a couple of weeks before my 18th, and I went to the recruiting just after my 18th, and I left for Kapooka on the bus. Went to the recruiting centre in Adelaide, jumped on the bus, and off I was to Kapooka. See you later, corn, eat my dust. That's how I was. See you hometown, eat my dust. And my mum had made an army cake for me, and so it was like a turning point in my life.
Yeah.
And at the same time, my brother was he was going through his own struggles. I felt like we were close, but I guess we weren't really. I didn't really understand the depths of what he was going through. Went through his change of life, going through the teenage years. He really struggled. He nearly got mixed up in the wrong crowd, and he decided that he wanted something. Mum and Dad paid for him to go to agriculture school, and he went that way. He went to an agriculture school and finished his studies there, and he's got his own cattle station, raising his kids out there and having an amazing life.
Yeah.
And I went that way, he went that way, and it was just a new.
It wasn't ever the same again after that. From sort of what you've mentioned in the past, it was like different. So because we're talking about domestic violence today, I know that because what I love about talking with you, you have so much experience. You've got so much that you've experienced in your life, so much that there's other people I talk with, and you just have like triple the amount of stuff that a lot of people have. You've just had so much life experience, Tiff. So because we're talking about DV, I think I'd like to get you back for another interview on another occasion. Let's talk about your army stuff, because that's a whole, like, probably 2 sessions in itself.
Yeah.
So about your first, you've joined the army, and let's go to your relationships. So from, I don't know how long you've been in the army for, and I guess we do need a prefix for everybody so they know, is that, when you joined, there was a lot of bastardization in the Defence Force.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you've experienced a lot of shit. But let's talk about your first relationship and go from there. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries.
Oh, well,
So
aside from that guy that you were, the older guy that you were with at your hometown, your next relationship.
yeah, so that was basically my first, you know, relationship, and that was, I think back now, and I think if my parents had been more accepting, I could have been running our own gym and gone into business, because that's what his dreams and goals and aspirations were, and I was interested in the same thing.
Yeah.
And he wasn't, well, I don't know, he wasn't controlling or anything, you know.
Yeah.
So I really kicked myself there for a long time. But my first, I guess my first serious long-term relationship is the one that where we had our son. So we'd come back from overseas deployment. We'd been deployed to East Timor. We had an amazing group of friends.
So you're still in the army at this stage?
Yep.
Was he in the army?
Yes. So he was in an infantry battalion.
Yeah.
And I was in a field force unit. So we very similar kind of work ethics, similar, very hard, go hard or go home.
Yeah. So yeah, just explain so everybody knows what a field force unit means, essentially.
So we're basically frontline soldiers. We're the first to go into battle, really. So the infantry, you know, they go in first, and I was in the logistics field force unit. So we go in behind, and we support and supply everything: vehicles, ammunition, uniforms, you know, you name it. We've got the cooks, we've got the transport, we've got the SIGs units. You know, logistics is a range. Infantry is the men on the ground, men and women now on the ground, who go in first. So they're either jumping out of planes into battle, or they're on boats or vehicles.
Yeah.
So we went to.
You're both in field force units. Yep.
And we had an amazing group of friends, huge network of friends, and it was just such a good life. We really enjoyed it. We were sharing accommodation with other guys who were in infantry, and all my girlfriends would come over for parties, and we go out together and celebrate things together, and we're just a big happy family. But once Timor hit, everything was just turned upside down. It was just like that. We just, as soon as we heard word that that's what was going on, we just knew that everything was going to change forever. It was never going to be the same.
So how old were you about this stage? Sorry to interrupt.
20. I think I'd only just turned 22.
Okay. Yep.
So quite young. And he got deployed, for his unit got deployed first, and my unit followed after. We crossed paths in Darwin. He was on his way, so he'd been there for 6 months.
Yeah.
And he was on his way back, and I was on my way over. And there was a lot of things that happened in between, and I essentially felt like our relationship was almost over, because so much had happened in that 6 months. So many traumatic things had happened, I guess, for him and myself. And so our relationship was quite strained. He came back with all this money. He came back with all his money, and first thing he did was catch a plane and go to Brisbane, and was hanging out with all the boys, and they just partied hard. When I was over there, I had access to a satellite phone, and I would ring him, and all I'd hear is, he had my car, and all I'd hear is girls in my car and guys, and they'd be cheering and drinking, and it was like that constantly the whole time I was over there. I had got told through messages that they had seen him cruising around the army base with my car, drunk quite often, with girls in the car, and he just denied it the whole time. So I couldn't let that get to me, because I was more worried about my car, but I was also quite devastated that, you know, the love of my life doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't care about where I am and what I'm doing. And there was a lot of things going on. I just had no one to talk to. And the one person I wanted to talk to was destroying himself, really. pissing his money up the wall, and just, yeah, it was quite damaging.
So other than that, what was your relationship? I mean, obviously it was breaking down, but what was your relationship like? It was a reasonably, like, you were happy with your relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, we made promises to each other that no matter what we went through, no matter what happens, that we're going to stick it out and get counselling, and everything's going to be all right. I guess we were scared because we were the first to sort of go into such a big campaign. I guess that's how we felt. We knew what the risks were because I was a Vietnam veteran's daughter. I didn't want it to have an effect on my relationship the way that it had with my own parents, you know. So we were pretty tight, really close friends. Cut a long story short, when I came back, he was still off. He was gone. My car was parked back in the base and was pretty wrecked. And there was no one to pick me up from the airport. So that was really disappointing. So I spent a lot of time on my own, and we'd been separated for maybe another 3 months or so. He ran out of money, and he called me up to come, and he saw photos of me just starting to get myself back. I was really unwell when I came back. I'd been sent back from overseas. I'd been in hospital, and I'm not going to go into that, but I had experienced some very traumatic things, and I was really sick, physically and mentally unwell. When he found out that I was back in Australia and I was on the mend, and I was back on base, I moved back into my room on base. He contacted me and wanted me to pick him up from the airport, and I was like, oh no, you know, he's run out of money. And I loved him. I went and picked him up from the airport, and he looked like crap. And I could tell that he'd really been doing the alcohol and everything, doing it pretty hard. So I was really disappointed. And the first thing he wanted me to do was go and get him KFC, and it was straight into my money. And we ended up back together, moved into a share house with some infantry guys from his unit, and within a month, within the first couple of weeks, I was pregnant. I was on the contraceptive pill, but 9 girls in my platoon fell pregnant at the same time because we were all on doxycycline, which is a really heavy antibiotic, and it makes your pills null and void. So we were on anti-malaria drugs pretty heavily throughout our tour. And then when we came back, they gave us a big dose, and I guess it just obliterated my pill.
And sorry to break in, but just to clarify for anyone listening, doxycycline is something that was, it's a known. There's actually, I believe there was some lawsuits happening at some stage because there was some massive side effects of depression and the like. And it was essentially given to everybody that was in the Australian Defence Force when they went to Timor. And it was, I think I've heard, I don't know if it was you saying, or I've heard people say that it was at the mess, just in bowls, not even in a packet, just tablets in bowls where you could just go and pick it up. So it was just given out like lollies.
Yeah, so we used to call them we used to say, oh, the lolly bowls are on the table for breakfast, lunch and dinner, and you just go and take your pills, and off you'd go. But we used to always say, you know, you'd have doxy dreams, so doxycycline, doxy dreams. You're on such a heavy dose, you'd be asleep, but your dreams felt like they were real, and it was just constant. I don't even know if you were even properly asleep. It was like you're in a dream state the whole time, and you're dreaming about things, and you think that it's actually real. So you wake up not realizing, oh shit, I was asleep. It's not real, and it would mess with your head because you're sleeping with your rifle. You get up, you go straight on, or you're getting up at 12 o'clock at night to do or 2 o'clock in the morning to do your graveyard shift, to go and, you know, clear buildings and do your you know, your turn for duty, and you know, I don't even know if we really slept properly, but it really messed with the head and what have you. You'd be, you know, I'd get sunburnt red raw, and I'd wake up the next day and I'd be tanned because my sunburn would heal overnight. And I don't tan. I have redhead skin, so it's pretty strong stuff. I have heard that some of the anti-malaria drugs, 1 or 2 of the anti-malaria drugs have the same side effects as PTSD. And I feel like that's what contributed to both of our traumas.
Yeah.
So going back to when we came back from, and we'd moved in together and I found out I was pregnant, he was so excited and I was devastated. I was scared.
Yeah.
Because the way that everything had happened so quickly,
Yeah.
and the way that he had disrespected myself and my belongings and the money, I became scared because I just saw this side of him that I don't want that in my life.
Yeah.
Thinking and being so young, thinking that I can pull him back up into gear and switch on to, let's get back on track. Well, that's my goals. Maybe that's not his goals. Who knows? But I think because both of us experiencing trauma, it was a recipe for destruction.
Yeah.
So we ended up moving into our own place. We ended up getting a married quarter, and this is something that I don't really talk about, but I'm going to. I didn't want to go through with the pregnancy because I was terrified of having a deformed baby because of all the medications and the vaccinations. And I mean, we had to have a Japanese encephalitis injections and God knows what else. My vaccine passport booklet is gone. I don't know where it is from my med docs. It was gone when I went through my med docs when I was being medically discharged.
But you're like a pin cushion. You're a pin cushion. Yeah.
It's a thick little book like this and all the vaccines. And I was terrified that my baby was going to be deformed and I didn't know. You don't know what you're working with. And I was because my dad was a Vietnam veteran. All I remember were, growing up with Vietnamese women in our army villages, talking about things, side effects of Agent Orange and deformities and things like that. And I was terrified. I was like, shit, I'm going to bring a baby into this world.
Yeah.
I don't want to bring a baby into this world. It's horrible. After everything I've seen overseas, I don't want to bring a baby into this world. And I don't really want to have a baby with this man right now because he's not mentally stable.
Yeah.
He was already showing signs of control and jealousy. I didn't know during that time that he had that he'd been physical with my own friends and had been cutting me off from my own friends, people that I worked with in my unit. He punched out my best mate at a nightclub because he danced with me. Yeah. And and I was friends with his partner. So all of these things had already been happening without me even realizing the depth. Yeah.
Oh, so you were aware of it, you just didn't realize how serious that was.
Yeah. And the depths of his infidelity and power and control of what he was doing behind my back with my friends were too scared to talk to me and come and see me. And I was becoming resentful. Like, what have I done wrong?
So you were resentful of your friends.
Yeah. Okay. So all these things started to unfold within the first couple of months of me finding out that I was pregnant.
Right.
So when I said that I didn't want to go through with his pregnancy, I was scared for the baby. He was very angry with me. I remember having the conversation in the car with him, and he glared at me and he was so disgusted, and he said, "How dare you even think about murdering our baby?" And he's like, "No." And he rang up his family and told all of our friends that I was pregnant before I could even have a chance to go and have an ultrasound or have a blood test or anything. He just went and told everybody I was pregnant. And I'm being quite blunt and candid here because this is something that I hadn't thought about. I don't think about those things anymore because it's so long ago. Like, this is nearly 21 years ago now.
Yeah.
And that you just don't want to remember those things. It was just such a scary time. I was losing control of my own choices.
Yeah.
And I wasn't included in the plan. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of women don't tell anybody until they're 12 weeks.
Yeah. So I just felt like I had no input into my own life. I was a career soldier. That was my plan. That was my dream. That was our dream together. But everything had changed. His job had become a priority because he was an infantry soldier and I was just a pogue. And a pogue is, in their terms, of just a pen pusher.
Yeah.
My job was way more than that. But being the woman, it was like this. And that's just how it was.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess I got called a feminist and a feminazi and all this sort of thing. And really I wasn't. I was just trying to keep control of my own life as much as I could. And I just got sucked into that cycle, I guess.
I think that's that big macho Bravo, you know, I'm a man, and if you want to you know, push the status quo, then I'm going to pull the, oh, you're a shite feminist crap, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he wanted me to leave the army. That was the next discussion. You need to get out and we'll get a married quarter and you can stay home and raise the baby, and we're going to have 12 kids, blah blah blah. And I'm just going, oh my God, no. But you know, he loved me and I felt like he loved me, and this was it. You know, he's planning our wedding, straight into wedding plans, and we got engaged. I don't even remember getting engaged, actually. I don't even know if we had an engagement party or anything. So my way of taking back my power and control was to go and organise with my bosses to get a posting closer to family. Because of his job, the closest we could get to was Sydney, because his family lived in Sydney, and they were all Catholics, and I guess that's where his beliefs come from. Was the religion of they don't even believe in. I mean, I wasn't allowed to tell them that I was taking the contraceptive pill, and abortion is way out of the question. So I accepted the fact that I was going to have a baby and I was going to make the most of it. And I had these dreams of having this beautiful nursery and all the beautiful baby clothes. And I started to really love the fact that I was pregnant. But my job kept taking that love away. The stress of my job, pushing pallets around in 40, 50-degree warehousing, doing PT, physical training for 45 minutes with your t-shirt tucked into your bike pants, and just being bastardized by middle-aged men who didn't have children, and just being treated like I was a malingerer. They tried to post me to a signals unit, which would have been 10 times worse. I'd already heard rumours of the pregnant women in those signal units who had come back from overseas and had dealt with the same card. Pill didn't work, got pregnant, and voila, here's your signals unit. Go in there and put up with that crap too. So
yep, I was supposed to do a signals unit. They're terrible.
Yeah, it's harden up, soldier. Hang on, I've got a baby in my belly. Yeah, get out there. Get into it. It's like, oh,
yep.
hell.
That's pretty much what it was like. Yep.
So you didn't have time and space to enjoy being a mother, being a pregnant woman. You were still a soldier, and you knew what you were getting yourself into. It's your fault. Yep. And
it's a really bizarre attitude. Hey,
I know. And it's like, your wife's at home pushing a pram and enjoying, you know, cups of teas and with her friends and things, and why are you treating me like shit? Like, why can't I enjoy my pregnancy? It's like, because you're a soldier.
I almost felt like it was almost like that mentality that well, you want to be a soldier, you know, then, you know, you just, you know, stiff up a lip and just keep on going. And they just no understanding of how a female body works.
Yeah. So I guess that's where my partner's idea had come into his head, that I was now a nuisance and a burden and a bit of an embarrassment, and I should get out now, so that you can go and be a housewife, because that's your job now. You're not fit to be a soldier. His attitude was exactly the same.
Yep.
So yeah, so I ended up organising it so that he could get a posting to an infantry battalion in Sydney, and I didn't want to go, but it was the best chance I had at keeping my career.
Yeah.
I hadn't had a very good time in the unit that I was in. There was a lot of bullying and bastardisation, and I couldn't shake the reputation of being a disobedient soldier and a mischief maker and whatnot, because I didn't tolerate sexual harassment and things like that. You know, I had experiences where I had, you know, men had tried to put the hard word on me, and I'd give them the old 1-2, and they could, you know, I couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't do anything about it because they were in the wrong. But word gets around, and you become a difficult
Right.
woman
And
to
then
deal with.
then you cop a heap of bastardization and bullying. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reputation sticks.
You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. And I'd rather be damned if I don't. So yeah, that's how I felt. So that was me holding on to as much of my power and control as I could, because I just didn't want to be taken advantage of. It was all out of fear.
Yeah.
Fear for my health, fear for my body, fear for losing my dignity and my respect for myself. I guess because I'd just seen it happen to so many people, even men, you know, seeing grown men in their 40s and 50s breaking down crying because of you know, sexual abuse or bastardization and that sort of thing. And I just didn't want to be a victim. So and here I was.
So you're talking back then you'd seen that stuff?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, right.
So
do you think it was reasonably prolific for that stuff to be happening even back then? For men to be accused? Yeah, okay.
There was just no avenues to report it back then.
Yeah.
You know, and people made jokes about it. That's how they coped. And it's not, I guess it's a bit different now. I still remember they put those I think they started OH&S sessions and fraud lessons before they did sexual harassment and what have you.
Yeah.
So and this is in the 90s.
Yeah.
So we got posted to Sydney. We got a married quarter, and it was way out in Ingleburn, and they were the old married quarters. We were in a suburb, so there wasn't anyone military around us at all, and it would take me a good hour to drive to work, and it'd take me 2 hours to drive home after work. And I was heavily pregnant throughout our move. All my money had been blown. I had no money left from my deployment, and I still had my little car that had been wrecked. And we had to drive, because by the time we did our posting, I think I was about 7.5 months to 8 months pregnant, and we had to drive. I couldn't fly, and I had preeclampsia. I was very swollen. I was about 126 kilos pregnant from carrying the fluid and the weight that I'd put on. I was experiencing already emotional abuse, where he was putting me down about my body. I was cut from head to toe, covered in stretch marks, and he would say nasty things about my body, which were quite upsetting. And I just really didn't feel good about myself physically and mentally. It was taking its toll. So when we moved into our house, within the first week, he had, I was about 8.5 months pregnant. He had bailed me up in the hallway. We were having an argument about money. He'd taken I bought a PlayStation, and he'd taken the PlayStation to hock it in, and that was the only entertainment that we really had. And because I couldn't really go anywhere, because I had to put my feet up with the preeclampsia, and I was stuck at home. I wasn't at work at that stage, because I was unwell. And he'd hocked it in and spent the money on KFC instead of grocery shopping. I was paying for everything. I was paying for the rent. The married quarter rent was coming out of my pay. I had I just had debts, and I don't even know where to start. So I guess store loans were his thing. Store loans for back then, they were like 26% for interest for store loans for a lounge suite, a fridge, a washing machine, a dryer, those sorts of things. Bedroom suite, whatever. And I was carrying the brunt of all of them. And his money was supposed to get the groceries, the fuel, Red Joe's and things like that. Electricity was massive in Sydney, and we were just living pay to pay, and we'd just go without money. I couldn't even afford money for maternity clothes, so I was wearing I think I had 2 pairs of clothes for maternity clothes, and the rest of them were my uniform. So I guess the emotional abuse, I say emotional abuse, it's the snide remarks, it's the not coming home, it's the lies, you know, they're lying. He'd say he's at work and he wasn't at work. He'd tell me that he's working late and what have you. And he had his own group of friends and I had no friends, and I wasn't invited to anything.
Isolation.
And that was really, yeah.
Isolation. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was still pushing me to quit my job. We had a fight about money, and all I remembered, I still have this vision, and you know, it pops up sometimes when I think about pregnancy, like when I see, you know, a family member give birth and have a baby, I look at how well they are and how blessed they are to be in the situation that they're in, and I automatically remember this incident of being heavily pregnant, trying to get a nursery together and buying secondhand stuff or taking stuff off the side of the road and cleaning it up to put in my nursery because I didn't have any money. And then the flash of him shoving me up against the wall shoving his elbow into my throat until I passed out cold, and I just fell on the floor, and I remember being unconscious, and he just walked out the door and shut the door, and I didn't see him for 2 days. And that's all I remember really of my pregnancy. It was quite horrible, and I just didn't know what to do or where to go. You know, who do you talk to? What do you know?
Were you contemplating leaving?
I did, but I didn't. I had no money. You know, I couldn't even afford fuel. I had to wait for him to put petrol in the car. You know, and I wasn't scared of him. I just didn't want to push his buttons. And it's like getting blood out of stone. If you don't got no money, you've got no money. And I felt guilty, felt like I wasn't doing enough. You know, I just had that mindset that I wasn't physically and mentally good enough because that's what I believed. And he led me to believe that too. He helped to contribute to that.
Yeah.
I never would have said that at the time or thought that at the time, but looking back now, I know what it is.
Yeah.
I truly believed it, that, you know, after having the baby, after having my son, I didn't even get to name him. I chose his first name, but it was last minute because he couldn't come up with a first name. But he named our son after his mate, who we don't have anything to do with anymore. He was just a mate that he deployed overseas with.
Yeah.
So my son had his middle name and his father's last name. So I'm really grateful that I got to name him his first name, because if his dad named him, it probably would have been something really stupid. Just being honest. So, and I really struggled to connect with my baby because I didn't have that love, that loving, nurturing pregnancy. It was just snowed down by bills and debt and fighting and stress and work and trauma.
Yeah.
And I just didn't get to enjoy it. You know, I just felt so disconnected from my son. I ended up having an emergency cesarean. He nearly died because of the preeclampsia and the stress. I was in hospital for the last 3 weeks of my pregnancy, and in Sydney, no family.
Yeah.
And so after my son was born, I had 3 months maternity leave, and I just stayed at home for 3 months. My parents didn't come to the house until he was 2 months old. They came over from South Australia and stayed with us, and that's when Mum started helping me out with money and things like that, because I think she realised that we'd been doing it tough for quite a while. And I always put it down and made excuses for, oh, it's because, you know, Dad's had, you know, my partner had traumatic experiences, and he, you know, I was making excuses for his behavior and absence. So I did defend him quite a bit. I ended up having, my work was so supportive. It was the best posting I'd ever had. And I guess it was the first time that I'd ever been treated with respect
At work.
in my whole career.
Yeah.
And that I was valued. My work was valued, and my dress and bearings were respected. I was always dressed well. My uniform was always smicko, and I was never late, even though I was struggling to get my son to childcare. So that was a whole nother kettle of fish.
Yeah.
We were even, you know, financially, because of how much he earned and I earned, my childcare was the full rate. So I was constantly in debt, and I would go without food. I lost a lot of weight, and I couldn't even afford formula. So I would drive for 2 hours to Parramatta to my partner's parents' place and take the baby, and they would buy me nappies and formula and baby wipes, and then I'd drive all the way home. Sometimes I drove all the way over there because I was so hungry.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't eaten anything, and just for I'd just have an excuse that I wanted to come and have a coffee with them and spend time with them, but really I was just hungry.
Putting that in a little bit of context too, Tiff, I actually remember that time as well. I joined in 2000, and I remember I was with Dan since 1995, and we struggled big time. Like, we lived on one wage, and I remember just eating potato and pasta and sausages, and that was it. And even after that, same in the Defence Force, you didn't actually earn a lot of money. It was sort of after I think, what I'm trying to think of when it was, must have been early 2000s was when they started giving us pay rises. But before then, it was really shit money.
I think I was on 35 grand.
Yep.
And, you know, yeah, it was hard.
And then paying full rate of childcare.
Yeah.
Childcare back then wasn't cheap either. I don't think it's increased since then. It's like the same or similar rate now as what it was back then. Yeah.
I can't even remember how much it was, but my whole pay was paying for childcare. So
again, same. When I was working, when I first joined the army, I remember I'd get paid fortnightly, and I would have $100 out of my pay. Everything else would go to childcare.
Yeah. It's crazy, isn't it?
Just thought I'd put some context around that, just so that people didn't think that you were bad at managing your money. We weren't paid very well. And if you were paying your full rate of childcare, you would have potentially only had a little bit of extra. I think my money paid for a pizza every Friday night and some Coke and maybe a couple of videos on the weekend, and that was what it paid for.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it wasn't until after we were separated that I actually had money in my bank account to buy myself clothes and healthy food and baby clothes and things that I needed, new tires. All of that stuff I could pay for myself because I was separated, which is disgusting. You know, they wondered why there was a high divorce rate, because you just can't survive.
No.
So my childcare was brought right down because I was a sole parent.
Yeah.
And it made me angry. You know, that I blamed that for things turning shit, even though you know. So
I think there's that disparity with, I think that just raises I don't want to get on the bandwagon as, women, are terrible, but the fact of the matter is there is disparity and there is that gap. Because I even remember back then thinking, I'm working here for like $100. Like it would, I had friends that got out purely because of that. And they just chose to be a house mum because they were better off financially in doing that, because then they didn't have to, yes, they were down the $100, but they weren't working. It means they weren't getting to work at 7:30 in the morning and getting back at like 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoons, and they were with their kids all day. So I contemplated that too, but I felt like you know, in a handful of years, things hopefully would get better. And I don't know. I just, for me, that was freedom. But I don't know. I don't know about you. Like, yeah, it's not, it wasn't that time of, um, in the Defence Force. Yeah, it wasn't good. We didn't get paid much money. Yeah. Sorry, you keep going.
No, you're right. No, it does helps put things into perspective, because I
Yeah.
had a choice to take 6 months leave without pay.
Yeah.
Couldn't afford that.
Yeah.
So 3 months, putting a tiny little 3-month-old baby into childcare
Yeah.
was the hardest thing I ever had to do. I regret it. I wish that I had got out, but at the same time, I know that if I did get out, I would still be stuck in that place with no family, and probably worse off
Yeah.
physically and mentally if I did. I stuck it out, and it wasn't, I guess, when you asked me the question before, did you contemplate leaving? And when I was like, well, I couldn't, like, it crossed my mind, but it was fleeting, because I just couldn't, there was nowhere for me to go. I felt like I was a failure. I
Yeah.
just given up, walked out.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't. I felt like, how am I going to survive? I've got no money as it is. What am I going to do? I didn't know anything about Centrelink. I didn't know anything about parenting payment or any of that stuff. I had no idea. My whole life had been in army bases, and I kept remembering my mum and dad, going through those struggles, and I just refused to give up. So I stuck it out. He got deployed overseas again, and I was at home with baby, and he started having his deployment money come in. So I started paying off the bills and the debts. He didn't care. He just gave me his card and said, you sort it out, you fix it. You use it for whatever you want. And I did. I just paid the bills, paid everything. And it was actually, life was so much less complicated and peaceful without him there. I actually started to feel a lot better about myself. I started to get my confidence back. I was really worried about him and stressed out. I was actually more worried about him coming home and not being right in the head, and as in just not mentally well and what have you, and taking it out on me and treating me horribly. Because I had a low self-esteem, I hadn't been able to get my hair done or look after myself or have nice clothes or anything like that. And I just really felt like shit. So when he came home on leave, I had actually gone and had bariatric surgery. Not bariatric surgery. The military paid for me, because I'd lost so much weight. I was going to the gym 3 times a day to try and build up my confidence and get myself back. And my bosses were older veterans. They were all Somalia veterans and Rwanda veterans. So they were in their 40s and 50s. And they could just see by looking at me and the way that I was. They used to, in our office, was very open, and they would hear the conversations. Well, they weren't conversations. I'd pick up the phone and my partner would be screaming and calling me F and C, you F and fat C, and blah, 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 and just screaming at me over the phone. And I'd quickly hang up because everyone in the whole office would hear it. And it was embarrassing. I was embarrassed. And my boss would call me into the office and go, what's going on, And in the end, I couldn't handle it anymore, because I started having symptoms of PTSD. I thought I had schizophrenia. I'd be walking to the warehouse, and because I walked everywhere because I was trying to lose weight, I didn't want to be a fat C anymore. And I'd be pumping it out, and then all of a sudden I'd just be blinded by visions of stuff like gory blood and guts, or someone being cut up by machetes, just horrible stuff, gruesome. And it would be blinding. And it got to the point that it started to happen so often that I would pinch myself or slap myself, pinch myself really hard to try and stop it, because I couldn't stop it. It was like a movie reel that would just go on, and they were getting longer and they're getting more intrusive, and it was affecting my sleep, and I was becoming exhausted, and I couldn't cope. I was getting to the point where I couldn't cope, and it was becoming obvious with everybody that I was working with that something was going on and something wasn't right. I went and saw a really good doctor, army doctor, and he put me on antidepressants. He said, "You've got postnatal depression. We're going to put you on these antidepressants, and we're going to organise for you to have a tummy tuck and breast reduction and liposuction to get rid of all the excess skin so that you can do your push-ups and your sit-ups and pass your BFA." Because I wasn't passing my BFA at that stage, my basic fitness assessment.
Yep.
So I went and had the surgery, and I looked and felt amazing. I had a breast reduction, and I just looked slim and fit, and I felt better. I could fit back into my clothes. I think I was about a size 16. I went from size 20 to a size 16, and that was good enough for me. Not
Yep.
good enough for the army, but it was good enough for me because I looked and felt really good about myself.
Yeah.
And I could afford to have my hair done and just get a cut, and it was amazing. So when he came back from leave, he saw this massive change, and I still had stitches in my stomach and whatnot. I had a lot of stitches. I actually had a staph infection in my stomach, and I had to wear sanitary napkins on my stomach to stop the pus from weeping through my clothes and sticking to my clothes. It was disgusting. When he saw me, he was really happy about it, and but he became very jealous, and he started to become jealous of the people at my work, and jealous at the fact that they were looking after me. So they'd organise for someone to come and mow the grass, and do these things for me while I was, they were just helping the digger out.
Yeah.
And while my partner was away overseas, and he didn't see that as being supported. He saw that as them trying to cut his grass, and that I was getting this attention. And so the put down started to get worse. He used to bring up about my scars and the stretch marks and all of this sort of stuff. And so I stopped putting up with it. I just started to argue back, which made it worse. So in his leave, I went to a dining in night for my unit dining in night.
Yeah.
And he turned up, and he'd had a few drinks. He turned up at my dining in night because he didn't want to come. I'm not going to a bunch of pogues dining in night. And he turned up, and he dragged me into the toilets, and he beat me in the toilet cubicle. The first time that he'd ever punched me, physically beat me, apart from the choking when I was 8 months pregnant. That's when he started hitting me. So he'd punched me up in the toilet, and I had to straighten myself out, and he stormed out, and he wanted me to go get the baby and go home. And I said, I can't leave. It's a dining in night. I'm a private. I don't have rank. I don't,
You'd have
so
your
I had to straighten myself out, and I just washed my face, and I had a split lip, and I had a blood nose, and I had a bit of blood in my eye, and you could see that my face was red. And I walked in there and sat down at the table, and my boss knew straight away, and he said, "Where is he?" And I said, "He's gone." And he said, you're not going home. And I said, well, I have to. And he goes, no, you're not. And I said, he goes, have you got someone to stay with? I ended up bringing friends, and they came and picked me up, and I stayed at their place. And I went and got my son the next day. And that's when I decided that I didn't want to be there anymore.
Okay.
I couldn't do it.
Yep.
So
Wowzers. So how did the process happen after that? And was there, was it reasonably with ease, or was there more stuff that happened with him getting angry? And
yeah, so it was the afterflow was that he would wake up in the middle of the night, and while I still had my stitches in my stomach, someone threw bangers in our front yard, those firecrackers.
Yep.
And he jumped on top of me and dragged me off the bed, smashed me onto the floor, and dragged me through the house, and it ripped all my stitches open in my stomach. And so I ended up with the staph infection. So things like that had been going on, and I was like, it's the PTSD, and he was in denial that there was something wrong. But there was something wrong. And I was defending him, but at the same time I just couldn't go through with it. It's not normal to be driving along in the car and you have a disagreement and your partner punches you in the head.
No.
Little things like this were happening.
Yeah.
And I just felt like I was trapped in that cycle. But because I guess because I was in a better place and my bosses had recognized it, they said, you need to tell us what's going on. We can't help you unless you tell us what's going on. And I told them, I said, he's not well. This is what's been going on. And they said, we know that you've been having money troubles. That's why we want to help you, with the cutting your lawns and all that sort of stuff. You need to look after yourself. You've got this baby to take care of.
Yeah.
And they knew that he didn't like them. He didn't like me working. So
Yeah.
I told them he wants me to leave, and I'm too scared to leave. I don't want to leave my job because I don't want to be worse off. My family's in South Australia. They
Yeah.
said, okay, this has gone too far. You can't be rocking up to work with a black eye and stitches. Get you having your stitches. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We're going to help you.
Yeah.
And they rang up Schema. Schema does all the postings and stuff, and they organised a compassionate posting.
HR in the Australian Army. Yep.
Yep. So they organised for me to get a compassionate posting to South Australia to be closer to my family. By this stage, mentally and physically, I was so unwell that I don't know how I managed, to be honest. I was just taking each day by day, and by that stage I had already I was self-harming without knowing I was self-harming. So I was drinking a lot of wine. My house was spotless. My baby was in bed. I had a full tummy, and then I'd just smash 2-3 bottles of white wine so that I could go to sleep at night because I couldn't sleep. I was just having nightmares all night, and I was having these flashes where I thought I had schizophrenia. I was scared I was going to get kicked out, and I was just doing everything in my power to stay on top of everything, to be the good digger, to do my work at work, to get my fitness back up, to look good, to taking care of my baby, and it was just too hard to balance everything, and something had to crash. And the psych had said to me, the military psychiatrist and psychologist had said to me, you're not dealing with these things, aren't being taken care of, so it's going to start coming out in physical side effects. So your health is starting to suffer. You're starting to get boils. You're not sleeping. You're self-medicating with alcohol to sleep at night, and it's just oozing out of you all this anxiety and stress and post-traumatic and stress and all that. And so that's how I got my compassionate posting. So I packed up and got posted. Actually, I got into my own married quarter, which was closer to work, and that's when we were separated. So he basically come home from overseas, and I was in another house, which he wasn't happy about.
So you're still in Sydney?
Yeah.
Still at the same unit, but they've moved you out of that house?
Yeah. And they've put me in contact with psychologists, psychiatrists to get medication and to get counselling, to be diagnosed, to find out what's going on, and getting support networks in place for myself and for my safety.
Yeah.
So I hadn't rung police or anything like that. It was all kept in the unit. I believe from what I remember, his bosses had been spoken to, and they basically just said to him, look, if you don't do as you're told, you're going to become admin liability, and we don't need that drama. So, and that was it. So it was just kept at that unit level. There was no police intervention or AVOs or anything like that.
So there was no retribution for you? He didn't? Okay. Because I guess he was threatened with losing his job, essentially, with administrative action if he doesn't pull his head in.
So, and that's where his, I guess, verbal abuse become worse, because he was angry that I'd taken his son away from him, that I was that woman that took everything and left him with nothing.
Yeah.
And not only that, he had to pay child support, and that was the worst.
Yeah.
And he had accused me of having an affair, which I wasn't. I was too unwell to even think about anything else, to be going out and having affairs and all that sort of stuff. I was just so unwell, and I was so exhausted mentally and physically. I was trying my hardest to just stay on top of taking care of my son, taking care of the bills, to keep my job as a soldier. And tiptoeing around this relationship, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was just constantly accused of having an affair. Why else would you leave? His family accused me of having an affair and leaving him for another man. They even said his uncle come to pick up some gear for him, and he even said my mum was staying with me to help me, and he said to my mum, "So who's the fella?" And my mum said, "What? There's no fella." And he goes, "Well, who's paying for all this stuff? How'd she get this nice house? How's she affording to work and have childcare?" And she said to him, "Well, the army's paying for the house. She only pays a little bit of rent, and because she's a single mum now, she is entitled to childcare subsidy and the rent assistance, and she gets family tax benefit and child support." And
Yeah.
it wasn't much at the time, but it was enough to pay for those things so that I had petrol to put in the car to go to work.
And food.
And food on, you know, yes, and to pay for food. And I didn't buy takeaways or anything like that. I was actually eating home cooked healthy meals for myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that,
so once that happened, so was that pretty much that, like that was pretty much it, or was there
Yeah.
other stuff that he was doing?
Well, within a couple of weeks, he was in another relationship, and she was a family friend, and they got married 6 months later.
Yep.
So you do the maths. I guess it is what it is, and I was just relieved. I was just so relieved to not be in that toxic environment anymore.
Yeah.
I don't think any amount of counselling and relationship counselling would have helped that situation, because it had just escalated so much over time.
Yeah.
It didn't mean that I didn't love him. I did immensely. He's a son. He's the father of my son, you know. But you just can't live your life in that toxicity,
No.
and it's a two-way street, not a one-way street. You know, you have to be able to compromise and trust each other. But there was no compromising, and it was just an uphill battle. So, yeah.
And I think often what happens is there's this pattern that people get into. I hope he hasn't done that to his new wife, or to his
I don't
wife.
I don't know. I didn't have. She's a lovely lady, and I didn't have anything to do with her, because I was very I guess I was angry because she had all her family's network were his family network, because her family went to the same. They're all Catholics. They all went. I mean, I met her. I knew of her. I used to go to their family swimming pool, and her mum would be there, and I just had no idea. So I was very angry, and I felt like they'd been having an affair. And I don't know if they were or not. It doesn't matter. It's in the past. But I become very resentful, and they had a couple of kids, and were very well supported by the family. And they ended up divorcing. He had an affair with an army officer, and they never had kids. So he's put all of his children through. Been putting all his kids through private school, and they've been to America. They've been to Disneyland. They've been on cruise ships, and all I had was nothing but years of abuse. You know, it had while he was married with his children, he was angry about paying child support to me for our son. He didn't feel like he should be paying for that. He felt like he was paying me money so that I could go and get my hair done and my nails done and things like that. But that money that I got paid for our son's schooling, his bedroom suite. He'd never had a bedroom suite, just things like that. He went to a little public school. We lived in a tiny little house. We didn't go and do anything huge and amazing with our lives. We just had very simple life, but it was safe.
Yeah.
And we had a great time. You know, we'd go camping every weekend and things like that. And so I guess I was very resentful that he's like, I want to see my son. You never let me see my son. But when he did go, when my son did fly over once a year, it was always to get my son back was met with threats about child support. I'm not sending him back until you cancel child support. I'd even drive for 4 hours to Adelaide to pick my son up from the airport, and my son wouldn't be on the plane that he was supposed to be on.
Was he aware that legally you couldn't do that? Like legally it just comes out, like it's nothing to do with you?
We didn't have a court, you know, there was nothing in place in court. I didn't have a leg to stand on. So
Yeah,
what I
okay.
used to do was I would ring his CO of his unit, and because I was no longer serving anymore, I wasn't scared of repercussions. I'd ring up his bosses and I'd say, if you don't get my son on that plane within the next couple of days,
Yeah.
I'm going to make one tell. And that, which made him an admin liability, because I was terrified. My son did not want to go. He didn't know his father, and when he did go over there, he just used to cry for me.
Yeah.
And which was sad, you know. But that's a whole nother level of of stuff.
So Tiff, thinking back, two questions. The first is, you know, if you were to give anybody some advice and, you know, relevant to what happened to you, you know, what would you say would be, you know, the identifiable things that maybe you didn't see back then, but you can look in hindsight now and see that you might say to somebody, you know, if this is the sort of things that are happening, you should be really thinking
the red flags.
Yeah.
I guess because everything had happened so quickly, it all started with the pregnancy. Well, I think it might have started before that, you know. I guess thinking back now, really should have had nip things in the bud at the beginning with support networks, you know, whether it be counselling through, there's so many support networks out there now that we didn't have before. Getting counselling, speaking to a counsellor, a social worker, psychologist.
Oh, yep. Your mute's on. Yep.
Just had a call through. Making a call to those, going online, you know, if I'd known about the wheel, the cycle, just those, it shows you all the red flags. I don't have a copy of it with me now, but when I did end up in another two relationships that did become violent.
Yeah.
And the last one nearly killed me. So it wasn't until I got the help that I needed through counselling and support agencies, because of the power and control that I was going through with my son's father, with the phone calls and the messages and the withholding of money and the, you know, just the threats and what have you. The emotional side of things took its toll on me. It really pushed me to the brink of feeling like I wasn't good enough, and that, you know, everyone would be better off without me. I thought I would have learnt my lesson the first time, but I didn't. I got swept into it again. And it wasn't until I saw those tools, those spreadsheets, and those, you know, the wheels of the cycle of violence, you know, this is how it starts, and these are the red flags, you know, withholding of money, hurting pets, isolating you from family, isolating you from friends, putting your friends down, putting your co-workers down, setting you up for failure, you know, sabotaging friendships, sabotaging work meetings, sabotaging your car or money, you know, by wasting your money, blowing your money, knowing that you have something important the next week. Just there's so many levels of like, if you just,
I mean, you said he was talking with your friends and like separating your friendships, but at that stage you didn't know that.
No.
So
He'd
even
had,
stuff like that.
I had found out that he even threw it in my face when I was pregnant that he'd slept with one of my blonde friends from my previous unit. And I had 2 blonde friends who I worked with,
Yeah.
just planting seeds of doubt in my head. He might not have, but in
Yeah.
my mind, I was like, oh my God, I'm on my own. Why would my
Yeah.
friends do that to me? Who am I going to read?
That's just a knife in the heart, right? So if someone wanted to look that up, what they could just Google cycle of violence.
Yeah. Yeah. So I can't remember. It's a wheel.
Okay.
You might be able to have a look. I should
I'll,
have.
I'll try and Google it. And if I can, I'll stick it in the comment section when I post this video. But for anybody that just wants to look it up, you think it might be wheel of violence or cycle of violence?
Yeah.
Is that for domestic violence?
Yes. Yeah. So I can't even think of maybe red flags. Yeah, I'd be looking at the wheel.
Yeah.
So it was something that was given to me at a so when I'd like to do another interview because I'd like to go into my marriage, well, the next level.
Well, I actually was going to say that because we've just gone an hour and a half, a little bit over an hour and a half now. So we're going to wrap it up very shortly. I was going to say, if you were willing to, I'd love to do another interview. I actually think we could do another 2 or 3 interviews, because you've had so much stuff. Like, we briefed over your army stuff, and there's there's some stuff that happened there as well. But yeah, I would love to do another interview with you, because I feel.
We'll print off. I'll get some printouts of these tools, and then you can have a look at it, and we can just talk about the cycle. And it'll really, if you've never seen anything like it before, it'll really open your eyes to the cycle and how people, and you can understand how people get caught up in it because they don't even realize.
It's like can't give detail, but I have a close relationship where like I think other people could externally see some things, and they were saying, hey, he's doing this, this, and this, and she was like, it's none of your business, he's not doing anything wrong. People could identify it, but she couldn't. And some of those signs, she just thought of it as a loving gesture of somebody, wanting to see what she's been doing in a phone and all this sort of stuff. But yeah, they're the early signs, right? Control.
Yeah, definitely. Jealousy. I guess the feeling of insecurity.
Yeah.
Not feeling secure, and there's little things that I brushed off red flags quite a lot. But it took me a long time to get back into another relationship, a long-term one. But the one that I did fall into was when I met my husband, and I thought this is it, amazing, amazing, in love. The rest of my life is just amazing. It's gonna be awesome. Met the love of my life.
So, all of the shite things aside, Tiff, how everything, I guess, because we have spoken about some pretty heavy stuff and it's pretty negative. Out of everything that has happened, and we're just talking about this section here, we'll do some other interviews with you. Did you experience anything good, or what good did you get out of it? However way you want to answer that is up to you.
I guess hitting rock bottom to the point where I think having my son was the turning point, because I wanted better for him and I wanted better for me, and it wasn't going to get better for him if it wasn't going to get better for me. So I wanted to do everything in my power to make sure that my son would grow up knowing that this isn't the way, this isn't right. I didn't want my children growing up in that environment. I know that his father had grown up in a fairly, his father had been violent. He was an alcoholic, and he passed away quite young actually. And I was close to his father, but I was also close to his mother. But I knew that there was abuse there towards his mother, and he had all sisters, and he treated his sisters quite like shit. I didn't like the way he spoke to his sisters, but out of all of that, the good thing was the fact that his family, all the women in his family, they just wrapped their arms around me and they carried me through that whole time. I didn't even have to say anything. They
Wow.
just knew, and they just helped me without even having to ask.
Yeah.
They didn't have much themselves, but when I did go there, they helped me out. And because of them, I was able to not leave my job. You know, they kept me afloat just by their humor and their love and their support. And I'm so forever grateful for that. And I've never said anything to them. I'm still in contact with them, but we just don't talk about that stuff. And I'd never had that. I'd never had sisters before, but they were like sisters to me, and their mother was like a mother to me. And I know that they went through a lot in their lives too, and I'm forever grateful. So that was good. And secondly, having my son was a gift that changed my life, and it really did show me what real love was, what real love and commitment is. And I was so 100% committed to this baby, to make sure that he knew that he was loved, and to make sure that he's worthy of everything, of all the love and support, and to have a good life. I just didn't want him to be spoilt by violence and tainted by that lifestyle I just didn't want him to grow up treating his partners like that, or feeling that he's not worthy enough to have love and respect in his life.
Yeah.
You know? So we had an amazing, it led me to a good place. You know, once you hit rock bottom and you know what pain is, getting things like being able to afford your bills, and not having to worry about money, and not having to worry about violence or walking on eggshells, it makes you feel so free and so happy. So when we moved to the country, I was able to do that stuff and show him what freedom was like and what being in control of your life was like. Let's go pack the car up in the esky. We'll go buy some chops and some sausages, chuck the swag in there. Let's go out bush for the weekend. And we did that every weekend. I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was still in that one place, in that same place.
Yeah.
I left all of those things that made me feel like I wasn't worthy of love and fidelity and those sorts of things. And I did that for my son. So out of everything, you know, it sounds a bit fucked up, but it's a blessing in disguise.
Yeah. I think
So,
there was one thing that like stood out to me. This was a few weeks ago. You and I were having a conversation, and you said to me about how, you know, you used to take your son out bush all the time, and now because at the time you really didn't have a lot of money, but you know, you might have had, you know, $20. That was enough to go and get, you know, some snags and some chops and the few things, you know, chips and whatever. You know, and you said to me that you would stop at the servo and let him get whatever he wanted, chocolates and lollies and chips and things like that, just to spoil him a little bit, you know, just as a bit of a treat, because it's cheap, right? Reasonably cheap. And then take him out. And you said to me, you know, which I just think is just really profound, I think, in a way, given everything that's happened. And you said to me that your son now even talks about those times fondly. And that he still would love to go back out and do that again with you. So that's just, yeah, that's unreal.
Yeah, he wants to bring his friends over from Melbourne, and he wants us to do a trip over there. So he'll be 21 at the end of the year. And we're not really both of us still semi-broadcast, but I've still got, I bought a little house that we were renting. I was able to get some money together to buy this little house. And I want to keep that little sandstone cottage in our hometown, because that's that's ours. That's for me. That's for me and him.
Yep.
And for the future, we both want to go back for a trip and go out to those places that we used to camp at, because I used to tell him all stories. You know, we had a huge network of Aboriginal families that we grew up with that are family to us, who come from those lands, and I raised him amongst those people that could tell him the Dreamtime stories before they passed away. And so it's very spiritual, and it's just home, you know, and it's special. And he said that he wants to take his kids out there one day, you know, when he gets older, and tell them the same stories and stuff. So out of everything that's happened, I protected him so much from, and sheltered him from all of that stuff, that he has good memories. He has fond memories of his childhood, of all of that stuff. And that was my main that was what I wanted. I wanted him to have that in his life. Yeah.
Very important. Yeah, especially as a mum. So before we scoot, I just wanted to make mention of an article that I quickly that I found when I was quickly searching before we were talking, and it was through the CNN, but it's through the World News, but it was on a website, and this was published on the 19th of October 2021, and it just says the Australian government is offering a one-off payment to help people leave violent relationships. Victims can apply for a payment of 5,000 Australian dollars, which includes cash and direct payments for expenses such as school fees. The scheme is open to all genders. While the payment has been welcomed by advocates, some say it doesn't address the root cause of family violence in Australia. Mary Crooks, Executive Director of the Victorian Women's Trust, says the country needs to have a larger debate about the blokey culture that places men at the head of the family and in most positions of government and corporate power. She also said questions need to be asked about why women are the ones being forced to leave the family home. Pretty relevant. There's other stuff within that article, but this is a new payment that I saw on the news. It must have been about a week ago as well. And I noticed that the government was going to help people to leave domestic violence relationships. So that's a good thing. So if anybody out there is experiencing that type of experience, there is help out there for you to leave. I'm not exactly certain where to access that, but you know, between now and when we talk again and we post the next video, we'll bring that information and we'll let everybody know in which state that you're living in, where you can go to access that money.
I've got a lot of links and a lot of so yeah, when we talk again, there's so much more, because I did have to access help. I needed to access help outside of friends and family. So I've got a bit of knowledge of where to get help and what's available. So yeah, can't wait to share.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. It takes a lot of courage. I know there's a lot of people out there that wouldn't have the courage to do that. So I really appreciate it. Thank you. And I feel like you will help people, even if it was one person that, you know, might get some benefit from this. I think it'll be good. Yeah,
no, I think I'm in a better place now to be able to be open and honest about things, and take accountability where accountability needs to be taken, and just be straight up.
Yeah.
It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. I'm past caring about what other people think about me and my reputation. I know that I'm a good person with a good heart, and that I've got good intentions, and that's all that matters to me. So if I can help someone else by being open and not have that, I'm just not scared anymore. I'm not in fear anymore. Good. It doesn't matter, you know, and if that helps other people, then that's all that matters to me. So yeah, thank you so much for
no problem,
calling me up and having a chat.
No problem. I couldn't think of a better person to talk to, share some stuff. So I just want to finish by saying thank you, and just for anybody watching or listening, just want to say that if you are experiencing any violence in the home domestically, it is not your fault. there are services out there that can help you if you're experiencing an emergency. You know that there's 000 that you can call, but for 24/7 domestic violence counselling in Australia, you can call the National Sexual Assault, Family and Domestic Violence Counselling line on 1800 RESPECT. That's 1800-737-732. So thanks again, Tiff, and we'll talk again soon.
No worries. Thank you.